We know that African Americans and blacks, they suffered quite a bit, especially those from the southern states. They suffered quite a bit under the Jim Crow law and before the civil rights movement and before slavery was ended, before emancipation, blacks and African Americans suffered quite a bit. And things were still not equal for them. Even the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act were instituted during the 60s. And we look at the Fair Housing Act before, even though they made it illegal to discriminate against different racial ethnic groups. But some people could still prevent other racial ethnic groups from moving into that neighborhood, and the Fair Housing Act could not do anything. And blacks continue to experience unequal treatments in different capacities. And I think the following reasons listed in different paragraphs contributed to why blacks and African Americans remain vulnerable even after the civil rights movement, especially blacks in the southern states. So we know that the structural change in the US economy took place in the 70s up until the early 90s. But because blacks, especially if they live in segregated areas in the South or other segregated areas in other parts of the country, maybe they could not move to different neighborhoods, better neighborhoods, due to things beyond their control. And they attended schools in that neighborhood, certain kinds of schools, which with certain quality of instruction, certain kinds of infrastructure. And because of that, most of the blacks occupy low-level positions, unskilled positions in those factories. And during economic restructuring, when there was a transition from manufacturing-based to knowledge-based and service-oriented economy, blacks, compared to other racial ethnic groups, had a harder time transitioning to other economic sectors. Because of that, they were trapped. And some of the blacks, during the Jim Crow law, they moved to the northern states, but they were affected due to this economic restructuring, due to their low levels of education and maybe low levels of skills. So it could be harder for them to acquire skills in other industry, to move to another industry. And this can be a manifestation of institutional racism. Racism embedded in the structure of the government and the economic system. And this is why I asked you about Ben Carson. It seemed to me that he and his family growing up live in a more integrated neighborhoods compared to blacks from the southern states. And people we know, can tell us different things, can give us different leads. We all know that. And this applies to all racial ethnic groups. So, if someone continues to live in segregated neighborhoods, they may know the same people their entire life. And because of that, it's going to affect their asset and wealth accumulation. They are stagnant in this area because of their social network or social capital, who we know can be a source of capital to us, like other forms of capital. We all know that. And due to their limited personal and business connections, this is going to affect how they are going to build and accumulate wealth. So this partly explains why Blacks and African Americans, they continue to lag behind after the civil rights movement. And their social backgrounds cannot transfer into other forms of capital. Even if they are doing quite well economically, their wealth cannot lead to more networks, more people they know, if they continue to live in the same place their whole life. And even if they have economic advantages, these advantages may not enable them to acquire different skills, different hobbies, different interests, different mannerisms that are more acceptable to be successful in the mainstream culture, so to speak. Their economic capital, their wealth and income essentially, even though if they are high, cannot translate into cultural capital, hobbies, interests, proclivities, skills, preference for art, taste for wine, among other things, that enables them to be successful in the mainstream society. So this could be part of the reason why some Blacks continue to lag behind after civil rights movement. And they find it hard to maintain and reproduce their advantageous positions, unlike other racial ethnic groups. And if they continue to live in segregated neighborhoods, sometimes segregation can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It can lead to decline in property values because neighborhoods occupied by other racial ethnic groups, maybe they have more wealth or they are more able to transfer their wealth into other forms of capital, whether it's social network or cultural capital or other know-hows. And because of that, it makes those neighborhoods more appealing to investors, whether it's investors that live within those neighborhoods or investors coming from outside. And this could be another reason why living in segregated neighborhoods can lead to decline in property values if economic development remains stagnant. If investors, whether coming from inside or outside, find those neighborhoods unappealing, they are not inclined to throw money into those neighborhoods to build them up, to benefit themselves and the residents. And due to the decline in property value, there are going to be higher mortgages imposed by the banks. They are going to be perceived as riskier borrowers or even predator lenders. So they are going to face discrimination in the financial institution when they try to apply for a housing loan. And because of that, it's a no-brainer. A bigger chunk of their incomes and paychecks will have to go to pay for those mortgages because they are being considered riskier borrowers or predator lenders. So this is another reason why some blacks, not all, continue to fall behind. And this can be a manifestation of institutional racism. Racism embedded in the structure of the government and the economic system. In this case, the financial institution and the banking industry. But after the civil rights movement, some blacks were able to advance socially and economically, but some blacks continue to fall behind. So there is a widening gaps within the black population in this country after the civil rights movement. Blacks who were able to acquire wealth, who were able to gain more education, they eventually have more control over their social statuses and mobility. They can choose where they want to move and what line of work they want to venture in compared to other blacks with less education and less skill. So those who were able to acquire more expertise, education, knowledge, abilities, and skills were able to advance themselves. And they were more able to have access to healthcare or other preventive care to improve their health as well. So we see that the risk for different diseases and illnesses also widen among the blacks. And in my humble opinion, things will improve slowly for all blacks in this country. You don't need to agree with me. And things will improve, especially for black women, but I could be wrong. And after the civil rights movement, blacks have more liberty to develop their own culture and experiences. And they can advance more on merit compared to the times of the Jim Crow law. And because blacks are able to advance based on merit, this widens the gaps within the black population. Because not all blacks figure out how to advance based on merit. So, highly educated blacks with more prestigious jobs, blacks who are skillful, they are able to integrate themselves into certain neighborhoods, and their social networks may change accordingly as well. And they are less hindered by certain restrictions, or through their high education and skills and expertise and knowledge, they found ways to circumvent those restrictions to advance themselves. And we also see an increase in interracial contacts and marriages. between blacks and other racial ethnic groups after the civil rights movement. But despite of all these improvements we see, we know that different dimensions of inequality, whether it's race, gender, power, income, social class, education, wealth, and other things interacts and intersects within a person to affect the person's life outcomes. And life outcomes can be educational attainment, occupational attainment, income, wealth, health, risk of diseases. Outcomes can also be outcomes in the criminal justice system. And we see that in this paragraph, blacks continue to be discriminated in the criminal justice system. They continue to have higher incarceration rates. And sometimes, in some instances, they are wrongly prosecuted.